One of my favorite features since Java 14 was the introduction of records. This is a special kind of class where you can create immutable data classes. It was long overdue in Java because we already had this in other languages like Kotlin, for example. So in this episode, we're going to learn everything there is to know about records, how we can use them, and how we can switch from class to record whenever is necessary. Welcome to Programming with Mati. Okay, so what are the features of records? Records have fields that are by default final and private. They also have a default constructor for all the fields. They implement by default the hash code and equals methods by using all the fields to compare. They also have default getters for all the fields. There is a default to string method that also uses all the fields. And finally, you can actually have methods on the records. So even though they are data classes, you can have methods in them. What about inheritance? Okay, records cannot be extended. So you cannot have subclasses of a record class. Also, records can't extend other classes. So records cannot have the extend keyword, and you cannot create a record as a subclass. And finally, records can implement interfaces. So there is some sort of polymorphism that you can have with records. So now why don't we go to the code and do some examples with records and see how they can be exchanged with classes. All right, so let's say I have this class that I want to create, the person class, and I want this class to be an immutable data class. So what would I do in this case? I would do something like, I would declare the fields to be private and final. So I'm going to say private final, and let's say this person will have a first name, then, it has to be a string, then private final string, and last name, private final local date, date of birth. Fine. So if you see, this is asking me to implement the constructor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to implement a constructor with all these fields. Because they are final, they need to be initialized. So now I have a constructor, I have the fields, but because this is a data class, I want to be able to compare this class with the equals method. So I'm going to create also a hash code and equals. So I'm going to do generate equals and hash code, and there we go. Now we have equals and hash code implemented. Thanks to IntelliJ, this is really quick. The other thing that I want to implement are getters and setters. So generate getter, and I want for the three properties. So here we are. And finally, I'm going to generate a toString method, because whenever I print this, I want to see all the properties. Okay, so I have all this code just to create a simple data class. So this is really annoying. I mean, this is really easy to do because we have the IDE that creates all the methods for us. But anyway, it's quite verbose, and if I have to add new methods, all these gets in the way of my new methods, right? So how can I do this in the using records? You will love this. So let's remove everything. The first thing we have to do is change the class keyword with the record keyword. And now it's having an error here, and it's saying you have to have these brackets. So you have to put brackets here Because the properties of the record are always private and final, you don't have to declare them as such. So here we just put the type string first name, string last name, and local date of birth. And this is, as you can see here, this is also the format of a constructor. So basically we are declaring the constructor and the fields at the same time. And we don't have to assign the fields in the constructor because it knows that it has to assign the first field to first name, the second argument to the last name, and the third argument to local date. So really, really concise. And this has already a hash code equals to string all the getters. So it's absolutely fantastic. I'm going to create a main method here, and I'm going to create two people, new person, John Adams, and the date of birth will be 2001-19. Okay. So this is John, and I'm going to create another John. This is John clone, and I'm going to say system out John, and we'll see the toString method there. I'm going to also check if John is equals to John clone, and this should be true because not because they are the same object, they're not, but because they have the same properties. The properties are equals, so the names and the dates are equal. And also we could maybe print one of the properties, so John dot name, so first name. And this is the getter method, you see? This is a format that auto-generated by the JVM. So if I run this, we see the toString method, we see that both are equal, and we see the first name John. So we have everything that we wanted. And you can see the difference between this and whatever we had before. It was a huge difference. This is really concise. Like I can remove this, for example, and I just have this. So it's a lot of difference. This is really compact compared to the old way of doing it. Okay, so now I'm back to having the old person class. You see we have all the person implemented as a class like we used to have. And I wanted to show you this very interesting feature we have in IntelliJ. So if you can see here, IntelliJ can detect that this class looks a lot like a record and it could be replaced by a record. So IntelliJ will suggest this to you here. So if you actually do this option enter or alt enter in Windows, you'll get this suggestion, convert to a record. And if I do this, for some reason it doesn't delete the equals and toString, maybe because they're a bit different implementation, but we can remove it safely because we know this is fine. And here we have our record class. So if you have a lot of classes and you want to move them to records, it's really easy to do. The other thing that you can do is move from record to a class. So if you do option enter again, you can do convert record to a class. And you get the class. So we'll go back to the record. All right, so now I'm going to create a method because I told you we can create methods in records. So to do this, I'm going to create a method that calculates the age of a person. So I'm going to say public int age. And this is the implementation. So I had to import the period class, and this is the date of birth, and this is the current date, which is going to be local date now, right? And I'm going to get the years in between those two dates. So really easy to do. And I'm going to create a new main. So we can use this. So let's say new person John Smith, and then local date of 2003, and this is whatever. So I'm going to put this person here, and I'm going to say sort person age. And here we are. So we have the age of this person is 23 years old. So this is really easy to understand, and this is really amazing because you can see now you can focus on your business logic, and you don't have to worry about all those other methods that are just adding noise to your code. Of course, you can override the equals and hash code. For example, if you only want to use the first name and last name, you can still generate an equals. So if I go to generate, I can go to equals and hash code, and I can generate equals for only two properties. So this would override the default implementation, and it will work the same as a regular equals and hash code. And also you can redefine the toString method. There you have the new toString method. So this is really easy to do, and I find these records really useful for working with functional programming, because in functional programming we try to use immutable objects as much as we can, and because records have immutable properties, then they're very useful for this. And what happens if you actually want to modify a person? Let's say someone has to change their first name. So if let's say I had to change the name, I would say public person change first name. And the technique that you use is basically of cloning the person. So I'm going to return a new person, and I'm going to add the first name, and then last name will be equals, and date of birth will be the same. So just to make it clear, I'm going to use the this keyword, and now we can change the person name, but we are actually not changing it, but returning a new person. And this is how you use strings, for example. When you modify a string, like when you do replace or you do substring, you're not actually modifying the string, you're creating a new one. The same principle applies here. So this is the best way to modify records. If you really need to modify a record, then you would need to switch to a class, and then you will be able to do that. But in functional programming, for example, we avoid that kind of things. We prefer creating new ones so that we keep referential transparency. All right, so what did you think about records? I find them really useful. I've been using them a lot. I'm really glad I don't have to use Lombok for this anymore, because You would need to remember to add Lombok and to have the plugin installed and everything. So I'm really glad that I can use records now for that. Even though Lombok is really useful for other things, but actually I prefer avoiding Lombok as much as I can. So I hope this was useful, and if you liked this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, like the video, and share with your friends.